This is a second live presentation that I made to a group of California progressives, California liberals, and I'm just going to play it straight. It's shorter and more succinct and more focused. The other video that you saw was me explaining for the first time in about a month. This one was like taped a week later, and so I had the ideas more clear. So this is a more succinct, focused presentation on how you can flip people to CalExit real fast. Here we go. Okay, I'll start with CalExit. So I already introduced this to some people last night or last time. I have a series of videos and I can forward it to you. So if you email me at marcus.ruiz.evans, marcus.ruiz.evns@gmail, you can get it. Or my phone number is 415-595-3394. That's 415-595-3394. And I was talking to Jody about this for 2 hours last night. I'm addicted. So if anybody calls and wants, I love talking about it. Anyways, here we go. I know that the idea of California being a nation, when you first hear about it, seems crazy, right? That's insane, right? That's nuts. What are you doing? Isn't this unproductive? The thing is that I've done this talk about 1,000 times. And when I did it last week, it was the same as the other 999 times. Nobody knew all the facts. And by the time I listed all the facts, everybody was like, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Hold on. That's true. That's true. That's real. Oh my God, that changes everything. So let me throw a couple things out there. First thing most people don't know is secession is totally legal. I'm not crazy. I know that sounds radical. So you can play along with me. If you have Google, open up your Google bar. You can test everything as I'm saying. As I tell you, it's going to back me up 100%. Everything's verifiable in about 5 seconds. So type in Texas versus white. That's Texas versus white, comma, consent of the states. Texas versus white, comma, consent of the states. What you're going to find out at Cornell, Stanford, Harvard Law is there is a case on secession. It says you can secede with, quotes, consent of the states. I've said this to 65 reporters over the last 10 years. Guess how many printed it? One. You're right, one. I'm sorry, it was one. 1 out of 65. Why did 1 out of 65 reporters I've told this to in the last decade choose to not print it? I don't know, but it's verifiable in 5 seconds online. So that's the first thing you're going to have trouble understanding. Here, the other thing is there's a guy called Erwin Chemerinsky. That's Erwin Chemerinsky. He's a dean of UC Berkeley and a dean of UC Irvine Schools of Law. He's a dean of 2 schools of law. Most referenced legal jurist in America 2017, president of the American Law Association 2021. He says a simple majority vote of Congress is all that's needed for California to legally secede. I've also said that to 65 reporters. Guess how many of the 65 reporters printed that? That's right. That's right. So if you type in Erwin Chemerinsky, simple majority vote, he comes from a 2017 article out of GQ magazine. So there is a court case on secession. There's only one in 300, 200 years. So you don't need to know other ones. It does say consent. If the news brings up Texas versus white, they'll simply say Texas versus white says you can't secede, period. And they will completely not mention consent to the states. They will also not mention that Erwin Chemerinsky is the top legal scholar in California. And he says a simple majority vote. Why? Because California joined by a simple majority vote. So Chemerinsky did not say you need an amendment. And the Supreme Court case, Texas versus white, does not use the word amendment. That means 25 states, not 32. Let me make it even more solid for you. Everybody know who Abraham Lincoln is? Everybody know who Abraham Lincoln is? Raise your hand if you know who Abe Lincoln is. Okay. Abe Lincoln picked Salmon Chase as head of the Supreme Court, and Chase is the one who directly decided Texas versus white. So Abraham Lincoln appointed the guy to the Supreme Court who ruled over Texas versus white. Abraham Lincoln, in his first inaugural address, also says, and I have videos explaining this, I would let the southern states secede if my rightful masters, the American people, affixed terms for me to do so. Meaning, if the Confederacy went to Congress and asked for a vote and got the vote. Newsflash, the Confederacy never asked. They just started shooting at the fence. So that's why it's illegal. So Lincoln says this, Chase says this, there's a court case saying this, Lincoln picked Chase, and we got a constitutional scholar. I can't get anyone in the news to know that. So that's the first thing people are like, what? I thought this was completely illegal. No, totally legal. Here's the other thing. How many of you saw the LA Times survey 2024? Half, 48% of all Republicans across every part of America view Lestel, Democracy Jesus, Bob, Tony, Christine, Brad, McKenna. Times survey, half Republicans view all Californians as not American. That came out 2024, LA Times, very reputable. Also part of that survey, 67, that's 67% of Republicans said California is nothing but a net negative, meaning California contributes nothing good, does nothing good, and is only bad. 67% of Republicans said that. That was last year. So let's add up the facts. If you get consent to the states and a simple majority vote, you can legally leave. Last year, half of the Republicans said, you're not Americans. 67% said, you're nothing but scumbags. Sounds like we got the votes. Also, if you need more, there was a Public Policy Institute of California poll, 2012. It asked if California's not a good state. 67% of Republicans said yes. In 1 decade, the amount of Republicans who think we're scumbags has not changed an inch. In the last 10 years, it was 67% in 2012. It's 67% in 2024. How many of you remember when people died during the Palisades fire? And Donald Trump says, I don't know if I want to give disaster aid because I don't like Californians. Anybody remember that? Who remembers that? Remember that? Yeah. How many of you remember when they shot artillery shells over the freeway? How many of you remember that Gavin Newsom said we need to close that freeway down, and Trump said, no, you don't. Keep the freeway open. And Gavin Newsom unilaterally closed the freeway. How many of you were aware that 30 people would have got struck by shrapnel if Gavin Newsom didn't shut down the freeway? Yeah. So let's add up the facts. People are burned alive and dead. I don't give a shit about you guys. There's a survey the year before that says you're not American, and I think you're all scumbags. Then I shoot artillery shells that could have got 30 people killed. Tell me, who remembers the Republican backlash to the artillery shells being shot? That's right, there was none. Yeah, exactly. ASG, AKN, yeah. Who remembers the Republicans saying, sir, I don't like these liberal commie Californians, but they're Americans, and you cannot deny disaster assistance to fellow Americans. Who remembers the Republicans who said that? That's right, there were none. So I'm shooting artillery shells, which could get you killed. You literally have charred bodies on the ground, and they're dead. And my attitude is, who cares? There was literally no Republican who said anything about the artillery shells or the Palisades fire. Well, let me remind you of the polls. The year before, half of them said you're not a fellow American. Who remembers the Marines being sent in against the domestic protest? That's never happened in, I'll be done in 3 minutes. They've never sent active duty combat trained Marines against the domestic protest in U.S. history. They've never shot artillery shells over the freeway of a state in U.S. history. Okay? Prop 50 passed. Well, they surveyed Californians during Prop 50. 67% of Californians believe we are uniquely picked on in all of America. 67% of Californians say Trump and the Republicans hate us more than New York, Chicago, Florida by far. So that's the facts. It's legal. It's completely legal. You need 25 states, And you have about 35 states who hate your guts and don't view you as American. I'm not trying to be negative, but you need to see the reality here. When they're shooting artillery rounds and no one protests, when there's bodies burned alive and nobody protests, when they send combat trained Marines against you and nobody protests, it's kind of like they're treating you like foreign people, right? We send combat trained Marines against foreign countries. We deny disaster assistance against foreign countries. So we're already being treated as an enemy. And like one of you was saying, it's going to get worse. If they're shooting artillery rounds and willing to get 30 people killed, how much time do you really think we have? Somebody brought up Governor Newsom. Does he support us? I say yes. And they go, well, Newsom wants to be president. And I go, did you see him on Colbert? Gavin Newsom went on Colbert and said there may not be democracy in America in the future. Anybody remember that? He went on Stephen Colbert late night and said, I don't know if there's going to be an America in the future. I don't know if there's going to be midterms. I don't know if we'll have elections. How many of you remember Prop 50 that Barack Obama did a commercial for Prop 50? Do you remember what he said? The entire country's counting on you, California. Think about that. A president of America comes to California and says, boy, I hope you guys get this one election in this one state right or all of America's doomed. Does that sound stable to you? Just a quick.
And that's how I end it. So around 10 minutes. We can shrink it to shorter, but that's basically it. I'm going to leave it there because that's the best, most truncated case I've made to date. Thanks for watching.